Anybody who tells you they know all there is to know about the technology used by our ancient ancestors is a liar. We understand a great deal about the techniques and methodologies developed by the civilizations that came before us, but we're a long way from knowing and understanding everything. This video is going to prove that. It contains the most mysterious technologies of the ancient world. We tend to assume that paper money is a relatively recent invention. Our ancestors started using coins thousands of years ago, but it's natural to assume that paper money is only a few centuries old at most. After all, how could paper money exist in a time before the invention of the printing press? To answer that question, we have to go to Tang Dynasty China. That means traveling back to the 7th century. There, the great minds of the era created the world's first paper money by using inexpensive paper they made from natural fibers and stamping values on the paper using block printing. By the time the Song Dynasty came along, printing paper money was a governmental policy. Aside from being cheaper to make and easier to transport, the desirable thing about paper money was that it freed up metal that the Chinese government badly needed for other purposes. The merchants of the 8th century nicknamed the banknotes flying cash because of their tendency to blow away during high winds. But the government stuck to its guns despite the objections of the merchants, and so paper money has been in use in China ever since. Almost everybody has at least one good pair of denim jeans. American history books will tell you that jeans were invented by Levi Strauss, but that appears not to have been the case. Instead, it's likely that the world's first pair of jeans, or at least the world's first denim, was invented in Peru some 6,200 years ago. In September 2016, scientists studied a scrap of cotton fabric discovered at the site of Huaca Prieta by archaeologists. They were amazed to discover that the fabric contains traces of indigo blue pigment. Prior to this discovery, historians thought that the dye had been invented by the Egyptians around 1,500 years later. Aside from using the same dye, the cotton is also identical. It's Gossypium barbadense and is known around the world as Egyptian cotton, but perhaps we ought to call it Peruvian cotton instead. It's generally thought that the techniques that allowed Strauss to make his first pair of jeans were learned from Native Americans, but it's entirely possible that the Native Americans learned those same techniques from the ancient inhabitants of Peru. If that's true, you can thank the Peruvians for your jeans. Claiming an old set of books as the personal diaries of Jesus Christ is an extremely bold move, but that's the claim attached to these 2,000-year-old texts, and it hasn't been disproved. The potentially world-changing books were found in a cave in Jordan in 2011. They've been extensively studied and examined in the years since they were found, and are still being studied today. It's thought that nobody had touched the books from the day they were written until the moment they were found. They would never have been found at all were it not for a flash flood inside the cave, which exposed 2 niches as it subsided, one of which was marked with the symbol of a menorah. Each of the 70 tiny books is made of lead leaves and copper bound together by wire, and contains text written in ancient Hebrew. The text appears to have been encoded. A single piece of leather found inside one of the books has been carbon dated and proven to come from the time of Christ. What's not up for debate is that these are the oldest written Christian artifacts in the world, predating the writings of St. Paul. It's less clear that they're the diaries of Jesus Christ himself, but there are plenty of people who believe they are. Religious iconography is usually a labor of love for whoever makes it, but even taking that into account, these miniature boxwood carvings are incredibly sophisticated. Only 135 of the sculptures have ever been found, all of which were made between 1500 and 1530 in the Netherlands. That suggests that they may even all have been the work of one person. The tiny altars are held together by piercings so small that the joints are completely hidden. We've only been able to determine how they were put together using X-rays and microscopes, But the fact we need such advanced technology to determine how they were made begs the question of how someone could have put them together without the use of such technology in the first place. The pins that keep everything in place are smaller than a seed of grass. The human eye is incapable of even seeing them. So how could human hands have moved them into place with such precision? Is someone in the Netherlands hiding an ancient X-ray machine? The only other explanation is that the person who made them was so incredibly short-sighted, they would have been almost blind to anything more than a foot or two away from their face. One of the most remarkable treasure discoveries in British history happened in 1912, when a fabulous collection of 500 pieces of Stuart and Elizabethan-era jewelry were found buried below the cellar of a house in the Cheapside district of London. Now known as the Cheapside Hoard, it's thought that the items had been underground since at least 1666, perhaps trapped there by construction work that happened in the aftermath of the Great Fire of London that year. The most remarkable individual piece in the whole collection is the emerald dial, a priceless watch set into one single emerald crystal. The watch is without parallel. No timepiece like this has ever been found before or since, not just in Britain, but anywhere in the world. It would have taken the skills of a master craftsperson to create this ornamental watch, and it wouldn't have been cheap. It's highly likely that it was created as a bespoke piece for an aristocrat, and perhaps even a member of the royal family. The original owner of the Cheapside Hoard has never been identified, but they left behind an incredible collection for us to enjoy. Only someone with a very strong Christian faith could have built the Lullibella Churches in Ethiopia, but even that faith might not have been enough to get the job done. Creating these beautiful buildings out of rock during the 12th century would have been an almost supernatural achievement. Every single one of the 11 churches was hewn out of one solid granite block. Ask a modern construction firm to undertake a task like this, and they'd tell you that they would require thousands of staff and several years to get the job done. But the folklore of the area says that an angel came to help the workers complete every single church in the space of just a single night. The work is so precise that light filters in through holes in the roof of each church, but water is drained away before it can reach the holes. Each church is connected by intricately arranged tunnels, with many hidden doors and passageways. The tools available to laborers of the 12th century shouldn't have been capable of work like this, and yet, here the churches are. In 1960s Turkey, an everyday citizen was carrying out some home improvements when he knocked down a wall in his basement and found the entrance to an ancient, long-forgotten city. That city is now known as Darenkuyu. Calling it a city almost doesn't do it justice. This underground settlement is positively enormous. At some point in the past, the ancient residents of Turkey carved an 18-story network of caverns and tunnels directly into volcanic rock, reaching a depth of 250 feet below ground. Nobody knows who built this, when they built it, or why they built it. The most popular theory is that it's the work of the ancient Phrygians. If so, the structures of Darenkuyu would have to be around 3,000 years old. Although it was forgotten by the modern era, it appears to have been found and subsequently reburied again several times in the past, most recently by early Christians who used it to shelter from Roman forces. They sealed themselves in with enormous boulders and relied on the stone shafts reaching the surface for oxygen. We wonder if those Christians knew who to thank for their shelter. We certainly don't. Our next artifact has several names, but precisely 0 credible explanations of its origin or purpose. It's the Disc of Sabu, also sometimes known as the Schist Disc or the Saqqara Disc. The latter name is a clue that it was discovered in Saqqara, Egypt. The best guess of archaeologists is that the 5,000-year-old artifact is a highly elaborate candlestick holder. If that's the case, it's the only one of its kind we've ever found. The fact that it's obsidian suggests there's more to it than a simple candlestick holder. Obsidian is a notoriously difficult material to work with, and nobody would go to the trouble of making a candlestick holder out of it back then when other materials were available. Even the fact that it's shaped like a wheel is a puzzle, because, as far as we're aware, the Egyptians were yet to discover the wheel 5,000 years ago. Conspiracy theorists on the internet will try to tell you that this is the steering wheel of an alien spaceship. We're not about to believe that, but the candlestick explanation is wholly unsatisfying. Maybe it's the ancient Egyptian equivalent of abstract art. When electricity entered common usage around the end of the 19th century, it prompted a revolution in the way that we live. Nowadays, we wonder how our ancestors coped without electricity, but we might have to consider the possibility that they didn't. That's because of the discovery of the so-called Baghdad Battery, found in Iraq in 1838. Whether by accident or by design, nobody can deny that this object functions as a battery. Inside the clay jar is a rod of iron wrapped in copper. It's possible that the iron was wrapped in copper for decorative reasons. But what would be the point of that if the resulting creation was hidden inside the clay jar? Perhaps the bigger question is, what could this artifact possibly be if it's not a battery? The device has been tested under strict lab conditions to determine whether it could generate and maintain an electric charge, and the answer was an emphatic yes. Having proven that fact, we must now ask ourselves what our ancestors were using batteries for 2,200 years ago when they were made, and how, as a species, we somehow managed to forget about electricity for so long afterwards. There are plenty of stone megaliths in the deserts of Saudi Arabia, but none like the AlNosla Rock formation in the Tema Oasis. The primitive ancient drawings of animals like camels and horses on its surface aren't unusual, but what makes this rock so unique is the fact that it seems to have been cut perfectly in half with almost laser-like precision and then mounted on a pedestal as if it were a work of art. The inscriptions are about 4,000 years old, so it's reasonable to assume that the cutting work was carried out at about that time too. That presents us with a problem, because there's no ancient technology that we're aware of that would have allowed a rock this large to have been split in two so cleanly. Some scientists who've had the chance to inspect the stone believe that the split was caused by nothing other than weathering, and the fact that the cut is so perfect is just a freak occurrence, but that explanation leaves a lot to be desired. Weathering does many wonderful things, but slicing vertically straight through a rock and leaving the two halves standing like this isn't generally among them. Ladies and gentlemen, we present to you the elephant clock. This unusual timekeeping device came from the mind of al-Jazari, an outstanding Islamic scholar and engineer of the 13th century. He was centuries ahead of his time as an inventor, and that's clearly demonstrated by the genius of his elephant clock invention. In completing his 22-foot-tall animal-inspired timekeeping device, al-Jazari was inspired by the Han Chinese clocks of the era and worked on a system of weights and water. Inside the top half of the elephant is the entire mechanism, which would make a noise every half an hour to confirm the passing of time. The rest of the giant structure is purely for decoration. The system works by draining water through a hole in the middle of a bucket. When the bucket is drained, it pulls on a string which sets off a chain reaction, resulting in a ball which falls out of the mouth of an ornamental serpent to symbolize that an hour has passed. It seems needlessly intricate, but it's undoubtedly ingenious. The original clock is sadly no longer with us, but several later reproductions exist. The Antica Thera mechanism is a perplexing and sophisticated device that was salvaged from a 2,000-year-old ancient Greek shipwreck. Everyone who's ever studied it agrees that it was ahead of its time, but some feel it's even more advanced than others. One school of thought says that it runs on clockwork, but comes from a time before such a concept had been thought of, and so it represents the creation of clockwork technology. Another school of thought says that because of the sophistication of the object, which would have been able to track the precise locations of planets and stars in the night sky, it should be thought of as the world's first computer. Either one would be an impressive accolade. Because it came from inside a shipwreck, most experts concur that it was used as a navigational tool at sea. But that begs the question as to why no other device like this has ever been found. Perhaps this is the only one that was ever made, and its inventor went down to the bottom of the sea with the ship. If so, what a tremendous loss to the ancient world of science. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and enjoy watching new videos on my channel. Thanks for watching, and see you soon!